You probably know someone who is clearly biased. In fact, most people think they can spot bias from across the room. What's the problem? Well, almost nobody thinks they themselves are the biased one in the conversation. That contradiction sits at the center of one of the most fascinating psychological traps ever studied, the blind spot bias. The blind spot is a tendency to recognize cognitive biases in other people while believing ourselves relatively immune from them. In simple terms, everyone else is biased, but I just see things clearly and as they are. And that tiny assumption quietly shapes everything: politics, relationships, leadership, media consumption, even investing, even the arguments we have with ourselves. The most unsettling part of all of this, the blind spot bias affects almost everybody, including people who study cognitive biases for a living. That's why it's particularly dangerous. Cognitive bias distorts what we think, but the blind spot bias distorts how we think about our thinking. Most people assume bias looks pretty obvious. We imagine it shows up in over-emotional reaction, irrational behavior, or even tribalism. Since most of us don't feel irrational, we conclude that we must be relatively objective. But bias rarely feels like bias from the inside. It feels like common sense, intuition. Maybe it feels like your experience, or it feels like you're just following the facts, man. That's why smart people are not protected from bias. In many cases, they actually become better at defending it. Intelligence often acts less like a shield, more like a high-performance legal team hired to justify the conclusions we emotionally selected in advance. Today's social media has turned the volume to maximum on the blind spot bias. Now, it existed long before the internet, but modern technology, as I said, has supercharged it. Social media platforms reward certainty and outrage over intellectual humility. Algorithms learn what keeps us engaged and then feed us more. Over time, smart people confuse familiarity with truth. Soon every article, video, or podcast and comment section seems to confirm what we suspected. Contradictory evidence starts to feel suspicious or dishonest. The blind spot bias then is a feedback loop. It becomes especially destructive when combined with moral certainty. Once people stop seeing their perspective as a perspective, disagreement feels like the evidence of stupidity or bad intent. Instead of asking, could I be missing something, people ask, why are these people acting so irrationally? Leaders are especially vulnerable to this because success itself can be the evidence of personal infallibility. So what's the cure? Well, it's not cynicism. It's not everybody is biased so you can't trust anything. That's not the answer. Bias doesn't make objective thinking impossible. It simply makes it difficult and incomplete. The goal is not to become perfectly unbiased. The goal is to become more aware of your thinking and when it might get distorted. Instead of asking, am I biased? Ask, how is my bias likely influencing this conclusion that I've come to? That one question changes the entire posture of everything. It introduces humility, curiosity, lowers defensiveness, and keeps you being dogmatic. And most importantly, it reminds us that being intelligent doesn't make us immune to any cognitive distortions. The bias blind spot may be the only cognitive bias that becomes stronger the more convinced you are that you've escaped it. The people most vulnerable to it are often the ones who proudly declare, I just follow facts and logic. Because truly rational people usually carry a little bit of uncertainty. They know the mind is not a crystal clear window into reality. It's more like a funhouse mirror that occasionally tells you the truth. And the first step towards clearer thinking is realizing that mirror bends for you too.